Hey, how you doing? Nope, I'm not the Dan Band. I'm the Lawnmower lady, and I like fixing small engines. Today's video is going to be how to disassemble, take apart, and clean carburetor in one of these newer little Briggs Stratton. This has the plastic carburetor on it. Guy says has trouble staying running. I think there's water in the carb. We'll get it all straightened out. So this little video is going to be how to clean the carburetor on this Bolens 20-inch trim mower. It's got a Briggs & Stratton 4.5 horsepower, and this is one of the ones with the newfangled nylon plastic carburetors. The way we're going to do that is we're going to remove the air filter cover, hinges off. I'm going to remove the air filter. We're going to have to remove several screws here. We're also going to clamp off the fuel line so that it doesn't leak fuel. Once I get the back of the air box off, I'll show you how the linkages go together, remove the carburetor, clean it out, show you how all that works. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do to remove this carburetor is to remove this recoil starter. It's not necessary, but it makes it easier to get to the linkages that are under there. This takes a either a 5/16 or an 8mm to remove these three bolts right here, and then next I'm going to be removing there are three bolts here. This one is an 8mm or 5/16, and these two down here and on the bottom take a 7mm. Okay, I'm going to be using a little impact driver to remove these bolts. It's okay to use an impact to remove, but you never want to use an impact to put them back in because they'll just strip out. A lot of these are in plastic housings and you'll just strip out the bolts. Okay, there's one remaining 8mm bolt that holds on this air box. We'll be taking that off, and then if you look on the back side, you can see the linkage. And it looks like the breather tube was not attached. We'll be fixing that. But this is the throttle linkage that goes to the governor, and once we remove the box, we'll be able to twist the carburetor out and remove that linkage. And then we'll also be shutting off the fuel line because we'll need to be connecting that, and I use a pair of tiny vice grips with some little rubber on the edges to keep from tearing up the hose, but we'll be clamping off the hose and removing the fuel hose from the carburetor. Normally I would have to remove the breather tube, but it was taken off, so we'll be cleaning up all that dirt on the back side of there. Now the carburetor, there are two tabs that slide out these slots right here, but you just grab the carburetor and turn gently and it pops off. There's a ring sometimes that goes inside of the carburetor, so don't lose that. Be mindful of that. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's sort of a white collar that goes in there as well. So if that pops off, you want to be careful of that. Next thing is to clamp off the fuel hose. And use some pliers to remove the hose closest to the carburetor. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get to, but it'll work right off. There might be a little bit of fuel that drips. Just be ready to catch it with a rag. All right. And then this gives us room to spin our carburetor off. And there'll be a little bit of drip coming out, but it's sort of an L-shaped thing. Pull it off, and there's your carburetor. We'll be cleaning all that up. So once I pull this carb off, I can already tell you what the problem is. Why it wouldn't stay running is because if you see that sort of bubble on top of what dripped out, this is water that was in his carburetor, so we'll be cleaning all that out. All right, I always have a fair amount of bad gas laying around from other mowers that I fix that I haven't taken to the recycling. I use that to clean off the outside of carburetors and whatnot rather than carb spray cleaner. It's a little less harmful to the environment, and it's a lot less harmful on all the plastic parts. But the first thing I am going to do is drain out as much of the remaining fuel that's in here, and you can see that big bubble of water and fuel. This carburetor is mostly full of water, and that could be because the breather tube was not connected. It was sucking water in if it was raining. But we're going to get as much of that out of there. You can see all the bubbles in there that are actually water and fuel. So that drain out good. Yep, mostly water. And then the next thing I'm going to do is use a, you can use an old toothbrush or a plastic brush. It really doesn't matter, to clean off as much gunk off the outside of this, because you don't want any more inside. And you definitely want to use gloves if you're using carb spray cleaner. It's pretty harsh on your hands. I banged my knuckles up pretty good, so I wear gloves because the gasoline stings. And be mindful too of this gasket. You don't want to lose that. If it pops out, don't let it go away. You'll have to have that to keep the air box from sucking in too much air. Okay, so now that I've got the big chunks of dirt off of here, I'm going to spray it with an air compressor, which I have. If you don't have an air compressor, you might have some canned air laying around, or just let them air dry. Wipe them down with a rag and let them air dry. Okay, so as you can see, this carburetor had a lot of water in it. Once that settles down, you can see the sort of sediment line. That's the edge of it, and it goes all the way around. So it was mostly water. And normally on a carburetor like this, you could actually just remove this bottom plug. It's like a quarter turn. Use a 10mm socket, but because his breather tube was not connected, I suspect there might be some dirt in there. The way I'm going to do this is, again, there's some 7mm bolts on the bottom. Going to remove those, and then I'm going to use a screwdriver to gently pry up on each side to pop that carb bowl off. It's pretty tight. And the other thing, too, to be mindful of when you reassemble this carburetor, this is really kind of easy to mess this up. It's kind of hard to see in there, but inside there's that white donut ring, and in the bottom of that donut ring is where the atomizer tube comes up. That ring will rotate, and without you realizing it, so you'll try to put the carburetor back together, and it won't be properly put back together, and it won't work. Okay, so once again, I'll be using the 7mm, and I only use an impact when I remove things. Remember that. Don't use it to put it back on, because this is all in plastic. And just be very careful. Don't mess that up. Once you get a little edge in there, then you can work your way around. Alrighty. Alright, so there's the inside of the carburetor. This has a lot of water still left in it, I believe. And be mindful of this depression right here. When you put it back together, that has to go on to where the fuel stack is on that way, not this way. Your carburetor won't work because that little jet has to line up with that little depression. Next thing I'm going to do is remove the float bowl pin, and it does snap in, so you got to be very mindful getting that back out. And remove the float, and be careful not to drop the needle valve. That will come off as well. Don't lose that. And here's the inside of the carb bowl. I'm going to be removing this fuel stack by levering it up with a screwdriver, and then I'll show you how that all comes apart. Just be real careful, get it right in between. And there are two O-rings that you have to be careful of. And again, be mindful of how it comes out. This is the choke part of the jet. It goes in on the far right. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but this is that thing that protrudes through the hole in that white ring I talked about. All right. There are several orifices on here that you want to make sure are clean. All right, there's a one right there, one there, and also in there. And we're going to disassemble this by pulling it apart. And on the atomizer tube, you want to make sure that all these holes are clear as well. Okay, so now we have our fuel intake and atomizer disassembled. I use a couple of different things to make sure all those passages are clear, but you see there's a little hole there, there's holes all in the atomizer tube, there's a hole right there, more holes there, and on the uptake tube. I use guitar strings are good. These tip cleaners for welders are useful as well. You just want to be sure and not enlarge the holes. Just use whatever's the right size. And then I'm also going to be using a little bit of carb cleaner to lightly spray the dirt off of here and make sure the passages are clear. You want to minimize the amount of carb cleaner because these rubber O-rings will swell up and then they'll fold inside when you put it back together, and that's not a good thing either. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to reassemble the intake tube and atomizer. I'm going to use a little touch of WD-40 to help that go together. Also be mindful of this Welch plug there. That should be in place. If not, that's another video, but they rarely come out. Make sure that snaps all the way down. And remember, when we're putting this in, we want the O-ring to go opposite the fuel intake. And make sure that the little ring on the inside is rotated, or has not rotated, so that it will fit in. And you can see the atomizer tube popping up inside of that donut ring. So back onto the carburetor side of the lawnmower, we're going to reassemble this. Don't forget, if this O-ring comes off, you need to reassemble that along with this white ring that comes off. They do go in a specific order. We're going to clean up all this, make sure the breather tube is reattached, and then we will align the carburetor in with these two slots, and we'll put the hose back on and move the clamp back down, and then finally we will reassemble the blower, the recoil starter blower housing. Okay, on your carburetor, you want to make sure that this ring stays in place, and this O-ring and this white ring go in. The rubber O-ring goes in first. Make sure that's seated properly, and then the white ring snaps in there. Make sure that is flush and snapped in. Next thing we're going to do is attach the carburetor linkage sideways, and then we're going to put the carburetor in. This lines up there, another tab there. Line it on and wiggle. And make sure the carburetor is all the way flush to the top of the body. Wait a second. You want to check and make sure there's no leaks coming out around your carburetor. And if not, you're good to go. Okay, now that we have our carburetor installed and back in, make sure that this gasket is in place and not bent up. We're going to install the airbox primer assembly, and this goes on just basically straight on. These two holes on the outside line up with the bracket. These are the 8mm bolts. We're going to attach the breather tube, make sure that's attached, and the two 7mm holes actually screw into the carburetor. We'll be replacing the airbox and the airbox cover, and we should be good to go. Okay, so we're going to make sure this post goes into that slot, and this breather from the gas tank has to go in front of here, and then we're going to attach the breather tube to the back of the carb box. Now, before we tighten everything down, we want to get all bolts in started before we do a final tightening down. I don't know what the torque spec is for this, but just be careful. You're going into plastic. Just don't overdo it. Put the air cleaner back in. You notice the hole is off center, so it only goes on one way. Don't try to force it in the wrong way. And there are two tangs that line up in that hole right there. And then you just snap it on. Make sure you can hear fuel going through there. And we do. That's good. Sometimes you have to pull on the starter a little bit to get it to set in. But it should be all flush and flat. Alright, so this lawnmower should be good to go. Alright, so there you have it. Disassemble cleaning carburetor on one of these newer Briggs Stratton. Hope you learned something. And if you did, please push the like and subscribe button. Which way is the subscribe button? One of those sides. And if you didn't like it, push them anyway. Do me a favor so I can make more of these videos. Thanks for watching. I'm the Lawnmower Lady. And as I like to say, mow happy.